My name is Anthony Mugenyi. I want to welcome you so much for joining this edition of World Day. Now, many stories have been lately running on this week. We're looking at Eid celebrations and how things have been going into the contour of the 3D Eid celebration, looking at Eid al-Duha. And now we share the moment where many residents were seen gathering at the residence of His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Rashid Yahya Semudu on Eid celebrations, on how to diversificate and create more emphasis. And our report, we're looking at different events that were carried still in the event, and our report, we're there to at least collect a few of the events and what you should know about Eid celebrations.
Has managed to support.
Under the clear skies of Chitende, the spirit of Eid al-Duha shone brighter than ever as Ambassador Dr. Rashid Yahya opened his doors to a truly diverse and vibrant community.
When you see the gathering, the people that have come to share for what Ambassador has managed to sacrifice, you find that in fact the number who are not Muslims might be bigger than Muslims.
The true essence of the festival of sacrifice was realized through an inspiring message of togetherness.
You can do something without even looking at any immediate benefit. When you know that is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you just close your eyes and you do it knowingly that it pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other side, it also comes with lessons to sacrifices which we have to do for our nations, for our people, even when we are not benefiting as individuals. So that is the spirit which we always want to put in the young generation, to know that they can feel other people's pain and share the pain with others, even with things which are not hurting them directly, so long as they hurt some other people in one way or another.
Re-echoing this powerful call to action, Haj Karim Karisa, Managing Director of Salam TV and Salam Charity Group, stressed the importance of inclusivity.
When the Quran mentions Ibrahim, the Bible will say Abraham. When the Quran mentions Yusuf, the English version will mention Joseph. When they mention Yahya, this side is it Jonah, and so on and so forth. So you find these people are the same. When they mention Jesus, the other side, this time I will say Isa. When it's sharing the meat, doesn't mean that it's only the Muslims who eat the meat, it is for all of us all.
He noted that true community development requires every Ugandan to stand together. Regardless of faith, a thin line there is.
We are descendants of Adam. We are all humans. When it comes on sharing, working together, sharing information, there we are ready to go. That's why you see we have an organization called the Interreligious Council of Uganda, which brings all the religions together. When it is time to worship, go and do the way your religion tells you. But other social issues, please let's share. And on this day, it's not for only Muslims, it is for all Ugandans.
When asked about the relevance of religion to someone's character, His Excellency had this to say.
Whenever I'm assigned to any duty, I know that much as I'm so concerned about my immediate boss or the boss I'm reporting to, but at the same time, I know that I'm answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That helps to know the people who are under me, to know the services which I'm supposed to deliver to them in the way which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that this worldly reward is nothing when it comes to the reward which you're expecting on the day of judgment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I urge every Ugandan avoid the small things which seem to be bringing differences and conflicts between them, because what we are aiming at is bigger than those small differences which always break our relationship.
From sharing meals to heartfelt prayers, this Chitende gathering stands as a testament to the harmony we can achieve when we unite for the common good. Bernard Katabara, Dembes Maya, TV1.
Bernard, for that wonderful report and different exercises that were carried on ED, and we are so much grateful for the Muslim fraternity that have so much continued to at least impact the community and celebrate so much with the non-Muslim fraternity and create a very wonderful best for all of us. Now, crossing over to USA, we are seeing different reports that have been carried on as United States and negotiators from United States have been reportedly agreed on a proposal of a 60-day extension that was carried out on the current ceasefire with the deal of different adversaries that were involved on the waiting of the final deal and different adversaries that came into from the president of United States. We're looking at Donald Trump and his exclusivity to this. Now, according to different officials that have reportedly this, many diplomats have been giving out different resources and arguments on how different tenures have been reached on different incidences and talks that have involved different intermediators to project this from Qatar. We're looking at Pakistan still involved in the debate. Now, many efforts continue so much to prevent the renewed efforts that are so much contradicting to the Gulf region and the different expenditures for these related to United States-Iran war. Now, the proposal is so much pushed onto different controversies that have extended this to the main character of security and temporary pause of military operations related to from the sanctions and different negotiators that have played a crucial role and large base outcomes for this that have included different sanctions and relief of maritime. We're looking at different security operations and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz that have followed this debate for more than the tenure. Now, we're looking at the reopening and itself as the future negotiations and climate different discussions that are pushed onto, and reports indicate for both sides that have so much been into the discussion and the release of the frozen Indian assets still related to the tenure and the possibility of mechanism for handling the missiles. We're looking at strikes and naval confrontations still related to the attacks on commercial shipping routes and the raised efforts on a wider region still related to that proposal. Now, although different negotiations on neither Washington and Tehran have been officially confirmed, but we're looking at a full detailed report and argument as officials close to the talks describe the negotiations as fragile and progressing as for now. Now, analysts have so much proved that they say that from Trump it could have been a major turning point in the crisis, especially looking at global markets that have so much continued on to the deployment and close watching developments across Middle East still related to stability, international oil supplies and the contour of the war its ceasefire. We're looking at weeks that come across different heightened tensions, the involvement of different missile attacks. We're looking at naval confrontations and different adjustments that come with the possibility of mechanism for handling and further onto Iran enrichment onto uranium and stockpiles and international supervisions, and the proposal so much pushed onto different coexistence resources as diplomatic sources and of the argument and different resources that have reached the indirect talks involving different intermediators from Qatar, still from Pakistan, and other efforts continuing to prevent the renewed conflict still related to the Gulf region in the United States. We're looking at Iran still related to that event. Now, many discussions still run on how things should be progressing and how the war should be handled from different officials that have described this as a progressive factor still related to Iran and United States confrontation. Now, that covers it for Iran. We're crossing over to Kenya. Now, USA plans Ebola on the quarantine still centers aimed on the outbreak related to the fears. Now, United States has reportedly been planning on to establishing an Ebola quarantine and the different emergencies that have proposed the center in Kenya aimed to have different adjustments concerning over the possibility of regional outbreaks still related to United States in East Africa. Now, according to the health officials and diplomatic sources have described this as the proposal and facility that will help strengthen the disease onto different surveillances and rapid spread and coordination frameworks and the isolation of different capacities in case of a cross-border Ebola infection still related to that. Now, the move comes as African health officials and different authorities remain at high alert now following the center of Ebola and different contributions in concern of different parts of Central, and we're looking at East Africa where officials say they have seen increased numbers of regional involvement and could so much push onto different tensions. We're looking at the risk of transmission still related to USA in Kenya. Now in Kenya there is a possibility of deeper regional transport and logistics still related to the Ebola itself and how things are to be consumed in that new are still related to Kenya. Now, responding to potential health emergencies across the country and how things actually are to be facilitated, renewed, and different reports indicate the planned center that could involve cooperation. We're looking at USA health emergencies in Kenya authorities and international organizations that have forced the epidemic and different counterpart terrorism. We're looking at health experts that say that the lessons related to the previous Ebola outbreaks in countries such as Uganda, we're looking at the Democratic Republic of Congo, West Africa, that have pushed this government into the involvement and investment for more highly, and we're looking at evading these discussions related to the systems and quarantine infrastructure for these developments. Now, officials have so much emphasized that the plan is precautionally related to the focus of the pandemic and preparedness following the central global health crises and the increase of different concerns over rapid spreading infection diseases still related to USA Ebola Center related on that emphasis. Now, we're looking at this as many countries come in as different organizations have been reportedly and giving a rescue plan on how things should be facilitated in Kenya still related to USA on how each of the event would be handled carefully to prevent further transmission of the disease onto deeper parts in the country from the cross-border transmission still related to Kenya, United States in this event. Now, that covers it for USA and its plan on how to create the center for Ebola related to Kenya. Now, we're moving over to Kuwait and we're looking at different discussions that have come into the tenure that claims, we're looking at claims of the Iran that has so much pushed onto the strikes on USA base as related to Kuwait intercepts, missiles and drones still related to that tenure. Now, Iran's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, says it is targeting USA military base in Kuwait in retaliation for the recent American strikes that have increased in the area to push furthermore on that. Now, according to the IRGC, we're looking at the operations that come in different hours after USA focuses on the strike on Iran drones, still pushing on to different facilities and military positions. And Badr and Addis Ababa still related in northern Iran related to that. Now, Kuwait authorities later have confirmed that the country itself has different air defense systems intercepted and the destroying of different hostile missiles and drone zones still related before the hit target related onto that. Now, USA Central Command, known as the CENTCOM, and said that Iran launched a ballistic missile towards Kuwait, calling it a very commending action of ceasefire violations still related to Kuwait and different facilities that come into the major casualties or damage that were reportedly been into the explosion that we had and parts of Kuwait during the interceptions still related to Kuwait involving. Now, the incidents marks on two different dangers that have come from the escalation into the Gulf region despite the ongoing ceasefire negotiations between Washington and Tehran still related. Now, Kuwait, which has most of what that has been hosting several American military facilities, including we're looking at Ali Salman Air Base, still related to that, and strongly been condemning the act and the attack pushed onto the development and describing this as a violation of its sovereignty, still in those discussions, still related to that. Now, the late exchange has been so much renewed on the fears over regional security, and we're looking at stability of global oil shipping routes near the Strait of Hormuz, still related to that. Now, we're looking at further developments that have come into, and the Kuwait authorities have later on so much confirmed and condemned the country's air defense systems and intercepted on different, we're looking at destroyed hostile missiles and drones before they could hit the desired targets, still related on that. Now, we're looking at major casualties and damages were reportedly been into the explosion and different parts of Kuwait during the interception, and the incident has been so much marking onto different dangerous escalations in the Gulf region and different ceasefire operations is still related to the IRGC strikes based onto Kuwait and different developments into that tenure. Now, that covers it for IGCR, and we're looking at different major concepts that have come into the negotiations despite the ongoing retaliations. We're looking at Washington and Tehran in that development and how each of them are responding to this. We're looking at Middle East related countries, over UAE, Iran, and more other that have been so much conflicted into this debate. Now, crossing over back to USA, we are seeing that 9 workers have been resumed dead in the major industry. We're looking at accident that happened one day. We're looking at different casualties in that. Now, authorities in the United States say that 9 workers remain missing as of now, and different have been so much presumed dead following what has been described as one of the country's deadliest workplace accidents still related in the recent years. Now, the incident had happened onto an industrial facility where emergency crews spent hours looking at search through the debris and the damaged structures after the accident or the tragic tenure occurred. We're looking at massive rescue operations still related to that tenure. Now, officials say that several workers were rescued and they treated of different injuries still related to both piece for finding, and we're looking at remained missing workers alive for the continued fed as different authorities and terms for the dangerous conditions after the site still related onto that development. Now, investigations are still working on. We're looking at the determination of different casualties that have been pulled out and cause fire, ceasefire. We're looking at early reports pointing out possibility and structure and failure of industrial we're looking at failure of industrial explosion and different federal workers and safety agencies that have so much been into the launch and foam fire investigations in the tragedy. Now, the tragedy has so much pulled onto renewed debates. We're still looking at United States over industrial and safety standards, and we're looking at worker protection and emergency preparedness at a higher risk. We're looking at labor inequalities and safety of advocates calling for stricter investigation and inspections of a stronger enforcement measuring onto the prevention of similar accidents still related onto future developments in that tenure. Now, political leaders have called on to local authorities and expressed that these are condolences to the affected families. We're looking at companies still related to this and a continued site facing the following seniority over safety compliances and operation procedures. Now, the accident is being so much into the demand and compounded onto different some weight worst resources still related to that new at workplaces and different work disasters that have so much recently happened in American history, looking at due to the debate of different casualties and numbers on the sky of different rescue operations that are still happening in USA on how to contour the demand and rescue the 9 casualties that were so much formerly presumed dead in the first incidences over the event. We're looking at more developments still related to the world today and how many of them are responding to this, and we're looking at different political leaders on how they are going to respond to this related to USA and how these families are going to be compensated in that new one, how each and everyone will be facilitated debating on how things will be running and how investigators are pushing so much onto the determination and exact cause of the disaster and early preparedness still related to the postponement componency of the structure and failure of industrial operations still related on how things should be temporarily, and federal workers and agencies that are so much readily pushed onto the launch onto a formal investigation still related to that, and have a formal debate on different occurrences still related to USA and different strategies that are so much to be pulled in the tenure over the agencies. Now that covers it for USA, and we're looking so much to presume our condolences to the affected families and how they are going to be so much responding to this event and carry out on different formal investigations on how this occurred, and so much presume onto these families. Now, a new day, we're looking at World Day, takes a short commercial break. We're coming back with Iran and what we should expect from the negotiations and what should be happening on World Today. In a written message carried onto Iran state television, Khamenei said that Iran enemies are attempting to create international divisions. We're looking at after what he described as a failed military operations and effort against Islamic Republic. Now, he urged that Iran should so much remain into unity and protect what he called as the country's coexistence and cohesion during the period of the heightened region tensions and the ongoing confrontation as related to Washington and Tel Aviv. Now, Khamenei also accused USA and Israel for using economic pressure and propaganda. We're looking at different political escalations and destabilizing over Iran and bringing the country to its knees. And we're looking at different remarks that come into this debate of direct negotiations between Iran and United States, called over for the ceasefire extensions and sanctions relief and the future of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, despite the ongoing diplomacy and tensions, we're looking at the remain highly following the recent missile exchanges that were so much reported in our early stories. Now, the drone incidences, we're looking at military operations involving both sides of the operations as across the Gulf region. Now, reportedly come into the agency, he also marked as the urged need for Iran to remain united and protect what many of them have described as a rhetoric of the period of the heightened region tensions and the ongoing confrontations still related to Washington and Tel Aviv. Now, in a written statement that was so much released, he described this and pushed on to over different weaknesses that were so much pushed on how political and economic military pressure has weakened this, pushing onto different diversities that come into the development. Now, so much act onto different remarks that were so much introduced into the direct negotiations between Iran and United States, continuing over the ceasefire tensions and sanctions on relief onto different features of the Strait of Hormuz and how different military operations should be carried, and the diplomacy of different agendas still related to the ongoing diplomacy and tensions that remain highly following the recent recent drone exchanges, and we're looking at drone incidences, military operations still related to the involvement from both sides in the Gulf region. And that pushes so much on how this has been responding to the agency still related to United States and how this cooperation will be pushing on to further negotiations as negotiations are still coming into, and what we should expect from these debates that are ongoing for the ceasefire agreement and negotiations to pull over related to Iran-United States confrontation. Now, that covers it for Iran. We're crossing over to Democratic Republic of Congo, and we're looking at a breakneck of Ebola outbreak still has been on its outpaces, still related to the global responses onto health officials, still related to Ebola in Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, health officials are warning that the latest Ebola outbreak still related to Democratic Republic of Congo has so much been responding to what many of them and experts are bringing to the description as the breakneck pace, and we're looking at growing fears still related that are pushing on to international responses in the struggle of the keep it out onto Ebola. Now, according to medical terms, onto the ground, we're looking at community mistrust and misinformation and the repeated attacks onto the health workers and how several are affecting onto different efforts to the containing of the virus in affected areas still related to Eastern Congo in that newer. Now, aid organizations and different organizations into the WHO say that the treatment and different centers are onto the emergency and response teams onto different first cohesions and different emergencies from local residents who fear the outside intervention so related onto different distrust government and international agencies for the tenure. Now, the insecurity has so much pulled onto different complicated contract tracing and vaccination for the campaigns. Now, we're looking at the safety and isolation of infected patients and all over the crucial measure into controlling Ebola outbreaks still related to healthy experts that are warning the deployment and the delay of reporting and responsiveness and resistance from many countries and communities, increasing the rise and risk of a wider transmission. Especially we're looking at remote areas, we're looking at the weak healthy infrastructure still related to DRC Uganda in this confrontation. Now the patterns are still going on, and we're looking out onto different outbreak that comes as across onto the continuing and the facing of multiple challenges, still including the armed conflict. We're looking at displacement and limited medical facilities into the preparedness and marking responses onto more difficulties still related to the event. Now the World Health Organization and other international partners have called onto the increased funding and security support and a stronger community engagement to push and prevent the situation from escalation onto further basis. Now the previous Ebola outbreak we're looking at Congo has so much killed thousands and people over the recent years. Now officials say, and different reportedly, the cooperations between communities and healthy workers are pushed onto the remainingness and essential to stopping the head onto the spread over the deadly virus still related to the insecurities and different medical supplies that have been supplied to the country. Now the security and different aid organizations have been reported onto different segments and centers of the emergency still related to Ebola, and how different facilities and the hostility for this for Ebola still related onto the preparedness, how the country should be in the position to prevent over Ebola and its outbursts spreadingness into, we're looking at West East Africa still related to Democratic Republic of Congo. Now crossing over to different engagements, we're looking at now UAE and how it is responding onto the different states that have condemned the attack on the USA base in Kuwait. Now different developments from our recent stories on how this discussion has been so much pulled onto the past. We're looking at United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been so much strongly condemned onto the recent missile and drone attacks targeting USA military base in Kuwait. Now this has been so much pushed onto the description of the recent incidences and dangers that are so much pushed onto the threat, and how this is going to be in the development onto regional stability still related onto USA Tehran. We're looking at negotiations that are so much pulled onto the escalation and how these arguments are coming into the preparedness for the involvement. Now in separate statements, the Gulf continues as so much warned onto the escalation of different military confrontations in the region that could further so much destabilize the Middle East, endangerment and international security. We're looking at oil supplies and different engagement routes that are so much carried onto different displacement systems in the attack, and claimed that the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Group Guard, we're looking at the IGCR, into that saying it is targeting and the best into the reports and responsiveness to the recent USA strikes inside Iran. Now, Kuwait air defense systems later on intercepted several missiles. We're looking at drones before they impacted the base. Now, UAE, we're looking at Qatar and Saudi Arabia, all reaffirmed and support for Kuwait's security and sovereignty, while calling the recent diplomacy and continued efforts still pushing onto further, calling the Strait onto a wider regional effort, and different development patterns still related on the conflict and the condemnations that have come into the highlight, and growing concerns over the Gulf states and the tension between Iran and United States that could so much spill across the region. Especially we're looking at different strategic areas across, as such as the Strait of Hormuz, into the regional experts are so much pushing onto regional leaders, continuing so much to push for development diplomatic situations as international mediators work onto the pressure and how fragile the ceasefire, and avoid onto further escalation into the military escalation over negotiations between Tehran, looking at the United States, and the ongoing best conflicts for Kuwait onto a military base still related to that. Now the condemnation comes onto different highlights and conservations onto the Gulf states, and how the tensions between Iran and the United States could spill up this across the region, and how UAE, looking at Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all reaffirming their support for Kuwait's security and sovereignty, calling for a restant diplomacy and continued efforts to prevent a wider regional effort and conflicts still related to the Gulf states, and the missile attacks in the ongoing arrangements and negotiations still related to Tel Aviv, Washington, on the arguments that are so much pushing on. Now that covers it for the Gulf region, and we're looking so much onto different debates that are so much expected on how each of them are so much going to be responsiveness to this and how this is going to be attributed onto the negotiations still related to Tel Aviv, United States, and the current different conflicts onto the United States pressure on different agencies. Now, crossing over to China, we're looking at Beijing wants Taiwan over military air operations still related to the tenure. Now, China has issued a strong warning to Taiwan, urging the island not to interfere with Chinese military operations taking place around Taiwan and the Strait and the nearby airspace still related to Taiwan. Now, Chinese military operations are said to be recent patrols and aircraft operations. Movements were so much part of what Beijing describes as route operations aimed at defending the national sovereignty and territorial integrity still related to military operations in that tenure. Now, the warning comes after Taiwan reportedly increased monitoring and air defense community systems across the responsiveness and the growing of Chinese military flights near the island. We're looking at Taiwan related on how their responsiveness repeatedly looking at the caused Beijing on different military pressures and intimidation tactics related to that tenure. Now, across China, we're looking at Taiwan as part of different territorial, so much pulled onto the ruled out rule of the use of the force to bring out the island under its control, and while Taiwan insists on its self-governance and what it describes as the right to defend its airspaces and democratic systems still related to the country, and how it is affiliating to this onto wider expansions and the latest interventions still adding up onto the growing security concerns in Indo-Pacific region, where United States and its allies are so much pushing onto the crossover fire increased onto naval and military presences related to the recent years over Taiwan. We're looking at China in this development. Now, analysts say that the frequent military exposure and encounters around Taiwan continue raising the risk over miscalculations between Chinese and Taiwan's forces still related to the debate, especially looking at regions of Beijing and Washington that remain intense in the push of the tenure. Now, the warning comes across after Taiwan repeatedly increased the monitoring and air defense activity in response to Chinese military flights near the island, and Taiwan has so much reported this and repeated the accused Beijing on how to use the pressure on two different tactics of how to push the different intimidations still related to China in Taiwan, and how many of them are describing this involvement to that add up. Now, that is for Taiwan and different airspace conflicts that are coming into the debate, and what we're looking forward for this, and the big expectations that are coming from Chinese still related as big allies of United States related to China in that tenure. Now, crossing back to USA, we're looking at the reported stories that we're giving on earlier. Now, a second person dies after a chemical truck has been so much intercepted and recaptured after a pipeline. We're looking at pipeline mill in the United States, and many authorities have so much described this as miscalculations onto different industrial pressurizing events still related to the accidents over Washington. Now, authorities in the United States say that this is the second person that has so much died following the chemical truck rupture over the paper mill in Washington state, turning the incident into one of the region's most serious industrial and accidents of the year and explosions so far in Washington. Now, the explosion and chemical release happened at the mill earlier this week. We're looking at the targeting of the earlier stories reported targeting an emergency response of many workers that rushed to evacuate the facility, and several employments still related on different injured on two different suspense and exposure of hazardous. We're looking at hazardous substances still related to the event and incidences of different occurrences. Now, officials say that the recent victims have so much discovered, and the recent reports push that many treatments have so much received, while investigations continue in what many of them caused as the tank to rupture up, and the safety inspectors and the different emergency stages that are so much reported onto the row, examining whether the equipment failure all the pressure build up was so much on the safety of the evaluation and valuation on many of them, as to why they described this as an accident still related to local authorities. Now, temporarily have so much pushed onto the warning nearby the residents to remain indoors as rescue officials push onto workers to contain the chemical leakage and monitor different air qualities around the facility. Now, the tragedy has so much renewed concerns over industrial safety in different regards and standards. In high-risk manufacturing plants, you're looking at across different United States, especially facilities in the chemical areas, and the affected citizens that reported damaged in this federal corporation. Now, we're looking at safety measures that so much to push onto different investigations to carry out on the fulfillment of the operations at the paper mill, and as many families and co-workers that mourn for the victims that were lost in this big strategy that has so much pushed on to different condolences and reveal of different industrial mishaps still related to the paper mill. Now, this comes onto different explosions and chemical operations so much released at earlier or this week of the strategy of the emergency and response of different workers to report the evacuation and different facilities still related to different employees that were injured, and many of them exposed to these chemicals, and different incidences that pushed onto the lost families, and different officials have expressed their condolences to the families that lost their beloved ones, and different investigations on how formal and different operations would be worked upon on different local based authorities, and temporary monitorization and inspection to push onto the renewed rupture of this paper mill, and many of them to push on how many operations should be handled in the structure of industrial development. Now, that covers it onto the paper mill, and looking at different corporations and investigations that are so much being pushed onto the development, and many of them we're looking at different occurrences and developments still related to Washington and that development. Now, we're crossing over to Russia, and we're looking at different developments that many of them have described as the rising pressure on the current president. We're looking at Vladimir Putin that was so much described onto this development. Now, we're looking at Russia, and many of them have so much pushed onto the highlights and developments onto the global warnings and job security losses related to Russia, still inclusive. Now, now we're looking at the losses that so much reported coming into Russia, and the Russian president, we're looking at Vladimir Putin, says Russia is so much escalating and development of advanced artificial technology, while warning that the rapid AI expansion could eliminate millions of jobs over worldwide, still related to artificial intelligence. Now, speaking at an economic and technology forum in Moscow, the president said that artificial intelligence is becoming a key security and strategic sector, and how many countries have failed to investigate its risk and failing behind its global counterpart terrorism competitiveness to the world, and how it is going to be affiliated to the noted and different AI operations still related to the benefits in the productivity. We're looking at self-defense and industrial developments in the tenure, and how many of them are affecting the seriousness of the risk of employment, especially into the sectors that rely so much on the routine of administrative work still related to AI inclusive. Now, the president warned that many of them have so much pulled this without proper regulation and planning, and the technology so much could so much disrupt. We're looking at labor markets and a global scale, and the passing of different agendas still related onto large cooperations and human workforces in both development and developing countries related to Russia. Now, Russia officials say that the country is investigating in AI systems for the use in different areas such as cybersecurity. We're looking at industrial automation. We're looking at different defense technology and database as part of a broader efforts for modernization of the economy still related to that. Now, remarks come into as different global competitiveness over AI and artificial intelligence so much intensifies with major powers including including the United States and China, that are so much expanding onto larger AI researches and development programs still related on the tenure. Now, remarks come in as global competitiveness over AI intensifies, as many analysts say that Russia is trying so much to position itself in a significant play and emergency for technologies despite facing international sanctions and limited access to some of the advanced work AI and different hardware related to software markets in that development. Now, the president comments that adds onto the ongoing global debates, onto the ongoing government still on how many of them are managing the economy and social impact of AI as technology so much continues to advance, and many expectations for that development and what we are looking for onto the job market and job sectors still related on AI. Now, that covers it for Russia, and you're looking at different developments that have come into that AI system, and you're looking onto the risk of job security and how many of them are so much responding to this still related to Russia. Now, crossing over to Ukraine, we're looking at different developments as the President Zelensky warns over shortage in air defense systems. Now, the President of Ukraine, we're looking at Volodymyr Zelensky, says that Ukraine is facing what we call a crucial shortage of, we're looking at air defense, periodic defense missiles, warning over the current levels of Western military aid, as many of them confront this as the enough need for counter-intensifying Russian attacks. Now, speaking at the national address, the president so much said that Ukraine's air defense systems are under we're looking at severe pressure as we're looking at Russia so much continue onto different contour terrorisms to carry out the missile and drone strikes onto key infrastructure and urban areas still related in the contour. Now, Ukraine has so much reportedly and relied so much on Western supply and air defense systems, particularly looking at periodic batteries, and furthermore on intercepting ballistic missiles still related onto the protecting of the sovereignty and major cities and the emergency of different military operations still related on that tenure. Now, officials say that Kyiv continues so much to appeal for faster delivery. We're looking at air defense systems, looking at the equipment for ammunification, and urging over delay into military aid and different direct affiliated civilization onto battle and different resiliency still related to that comments. Now, comments coming to aim so much onto the ongoing long confrontations as the war with Russia and so much continues with the straight and straightening Ukrainian military services into the infrastructure related onto that debate, and stressing what many of them have pulled so much onto international support that remains virtual and scale onto the frequency of Russian attacks and outspacing of available defense capabilities related onto revealing different parts of the country more expected on exposure and how many of them are to react to this in the defense, and how different cooperation activities are to be operated still related to Ukraine air defense system. Now, this comes into different warnings and level of different Western military power that are so much pushed onto the aid and pushed on how the intensifying over the attacks onto Russia-Ukraine counterpart confrontations still related onto that. Now, the president so much addresses and so much confesses onto the different severe pressure occurred onto Ukraine related on how many of them and different facilities are so much being damaged, and this has pushed onto different developments and how each of them is to be operated effectively. Now, that covers it for Ukraine. We're looking at different developments that are coming into that negotiations from Zelensky and how different operations would be pushed onto that tenure. Now, crossing over to United Kingdom, we're looking at Britain and Poland signing what we call a treaty that will be so much strengthening their cooperation in that confrontation related to the Northgate Treaty in this debate. Now, United Kingdom and Poland have signed what we call the Northgate Treaty so much onto onto the new defense agreement, and aimed onto strengthening military cooperation and the ongoing for both countries, describing this as a rising Russia aid, hybrid and threat onto across Europe, still related onto that treaty. Now this comes as a deal as many of them are signing during the high-level talks still related in Northern. We're looking at London and bringing this togetherness of different officials described who are pushing onto the emphasis and closeness of the condition and cooperation onto the coordination onto different cybersecurity, intelligence sharing, and the joint military readiness onto this treaty. Now this comes under the agreement for both countries that are so much expected to expand joint training exercises, improve rapidness onto responsiveness onto the capabilities, and enhance cooperation in promoting and protecting the crucial infrastructure related to cyber and information onto different malware and welfare related officials. Now officials say that the treaty so much reflects onto the growing and concerns in Europe over the hybrid attacks, including the cyber attacks into the continua and disinformation and different campaigns and different advocate operations that have linked onto the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, and this is subsidizing their development for this agreement. Now the agreement is also much pushing on to reinforcing NATO-aligned cooperations between London and Warsaw that has so much pushed for both countries between the continued support for Ukraine and strengthening further Eastern European defense military systems for that development. Now we're looking at British and Polish leaders have described the treaty as a long-term commitment and regional security development for the stability and defense against the ongoing security threats that are pushing the countries to secure their military aid operations for the deal that was signed during a high-level talk on London itself, bringing the togetherness for both defense systems and different operations, emphasis for the coordination and cybersecurity concerns for that development. And what we should expect from this defense system at treaty so signed is we're looking at different cooperation plans and strengthening of different expansions for both ends that are expected to share different agencies. We're looking at intelligence, we're looking at cybersecurity, we're looking at joint military operations that are in the portion for readiness for both that tenure that covers in for that and bigger expectations that are coming into the tenure for that development. Now that covers it for UK. We're looking at United States and Poland, and the agreement that so much pushes onto the development and arguments for the threats that are coming in for Europe, and we're looking at exclusiveness for we're looking at Russia itself and Ukraine that are coming into the security concern for this development, and bigger expectations that are coming into this for a random play, and how officials would be reflecting to this as a concern for both Europe and over different hybrid attacks, including looking at cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and over the conduct of operations, and more onto the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. And the argument so much reflects onto different NATO-aligned cooperations between London and Warsaw, and over different countries that have continued so much to support Ukraine, and the subsidiances for different developments still related in the defense systems for that development. Now covering more in, we are concluding on and finalizing with Japan, and we're looking at Japan and Philippines have so much agreed onto upgrading their ties onto different partnerships that are coming into the development. And now Japan and Philippines have so much agreed onto upgrading their relationship so much onto the strategic partnership and different strategics that are so much depending onto their defense systems and security operations aimed at raising different regional tensions in the Indo-Pacific. We're looking at the Indo-Pacific agreements and the allies that rely on this inclusiveness. Now the agreement has so much reached onto during the high-level talks we're looking at in Tokyo, where different both sides emphasized stronger military coordination. We're looking at the maritime and different cybersecurity attacks and joint responsiveness to regional threats and different operations that are in that tenure, and expectations on different governance for this development to push in and out on different tenures. Now the agreement has so much reached onto different Officials that have described this as a different relevancy that includes the expansiveness and inclusiveness for different activities for the development and the side plans for sharing a closer cooperation and between the Coast Guard and naval forces. We're looking at particularly in the dispute of heavily monitored sea routes for that development. Now, more likely, we're looking at a widening part as we see broader efforts that are so much into the regional allies to strengthen security architecture in the Indo-Pacific. We're looking at different disputes and geopolitical competitions over concerned security overweight and disputes for freedom of navigation. Now, both countries have agreed so much to increase onto cooperation. We're looking at over Tehran and over different freedom investigations over the development. And now this comes in for both countries that have agreed so much to increase cooperations onto disaster and responsiveness, onto economic resiliency, infrastructure development, and finally on part of upgrading framework for the development related to Japan. Philippines leaders are describing this argument as a milestone for bilateral relationships and aimed onto promoting stability, still related on peace rules and based on operations governance, still in that development related to Japan, Philippines, and how many of them are expanding their developments for both crucial features for this development and the tenure. Now, the move is widely seen as a broader effort for regional itself and different allies that are so much strengthening their architecture. We're looking at different advancements that are coming into the monitored heavy routes and assets that are governed into this development for a closer cooperation between Coast Guard and naval bases related into the cooperation activities, and finally looking at bigger developments and bigger naval responsiveness for this upgrade, and that comes in for Philippines and Japan, and what we should expect from this upgrade and different strengthening of the partnership, and looking at different humanitarian crossover different systems to exercise. We're looking at improved artificial intelligence sharing and a closer cooperation between the close operation Coast Guard and naval forces for this development. And this has covered in for this, and you're looking at different counterpart terrorism for this engagement, and this covers it for now. We're looking at deeper efforts that are into the newer and different effort plans that are on the development. Now that covers it for now. We're looking at more developments that are coming into on TV1 especially, and more developments that are coming into. We're looking at inside politics. We're looking at different programs that are coming in still related onto how we shall discuss our political rhythm and political agenda for this inclusiveness for the agenda. Now, more programs that are coming in, this covers it for World Today. We're looking at more intensifying our political agendas into the debate, and more, however, different cooperation stands in this, and more, however, involved onto different cooperation activities into this tenure. Now, this covers it for now. We're looking at more developments that are coming in on TV1, and more onto how bilateral politics and geographic patterns would be pushed on this, and how the endangerment for both is still related onto this development. Now we're looking at different agendas onto the world of geopolitics, and this is what we have for you that has happened in the last 24 hours still related onto Japan. We're looking at Middle East, we're looking at Uganda, we're looking at the Ebola outbreak, we're looking at finally the incidences that are occurred into this development, and more, however, the more cooperation agendas into this plan for in and out on the final tenure for this development. I'm Anthony Mugenyi. We're looking at more activities and programs that are coming in on TV1. Stay tuned. We are so much grateful for our audience and our listeners that have kept in on World Day from the beginning of the session till the closer of the edition on World Day. Now, major developments are still coming in. We're looking so much forward onto the end of Eid al-Adha, and finally finalizing with more efforts still related on Eid al-Adha. I'm wishing you a very wonderful weekend. It is a Friday, and we're hoping so much forward onto a Monday.